and welcome to a very special episode of PHILCast today. I have an extraordinary guest with me whose life and career will make many space tech and car buff enthusiasts very jealous. So welcome, Jim Cantrell, CEO of Phantom Space Corp, car enthusiast, and one of the founding members of SpaceX. Hi, Jim.
Hi, pleased to be here.
Now, Jim, you have a fascinating personal and career story. So you're an entrepreneur, you're a mechanical engineer, and a road racer. So can you tell me a bit more about your background?
Yeah, so I like to think of myself just as a builder, and I've always been fascinated with building things, whether it's cars, whether it's businesses, spaceships, rockets. As long as I'm building something, even businesses, I'm happy. So I followed that path in my career. Ended up getting into engineering, probably against my better judgment in college, and was planning on working for the automotive industry, but ended up being diverted off into space because I joined a NASA-sponsored space design course back in college, and that led me to getting an internship with NASA, and that then led me to connections with the French Space Agency and the Soviets back when the Soviet Union was still around. And I ended up in France for a number of years and working on a Soviet mission to Mars with French collaboration on that. And then I ended up, when that was over, when the Soviet Union fell, came back to the United States. I was recruited by the intelligence agencies here to help stop brain drain in Russia, post-Soviet Russia, and spent a number of years over there. And then one of the things we did was convert ICBMs to satellite launchers, and that led Elon Musk to call me in 2001. We tried to buy some Russian launch vehicles in Russia. That failed. We started SpaceX. I left SpaceX because I didn't think it would work, and spent about a year and a half with Elon, and then started my own company, which did very well. And so I've been in startups ever since about 2010. Because SpaceX made safe for investments. And so I'm right now in charge of a rocket company that went and grabbed some of my early guys from SpaceX and said, hey, what would SpaceX do 20 years later? Let's go do it. And that's what Phantom Space is about.
That's absolutely incredible. I love your story. And I'm sure many of our listeners would be listening to this and thinking, I'm probably not doing enough with my life. I probably have not explored enough of my dreams. And, the space aspect of what you've been working on personally for me is absolutely fascinating, because I remember when I went to the Kennedy Space Center, and that was just mind-blowing for me. I couldn't believe that I was there. And as a little 12-year-old girl coming from South Africa and going all the way overseas and then going to the Space Center, it's so unfathomable for just, the average person to look at something that's being built in front of them behind these windows. And eventually, like a few days or a few months from now, that thing is going to be orbiting us in the sky, and I was very lucky enough to see them building a part of the space station at that time. So I would love to know from somebody who's been inside the space sector, what is that like? I mean, it must be seriously exciting, but I'm sure there's tons of pressure, and I'm sure you meet a lot of interesting characters as well along the way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You're right. The excitement is there. It's the thing that I felt in the early days when I first started in this business. It fueled a lot of my, I would say overachievement. I really wasn't an extraordinary student. I wasn't an extraordinary person. I just followed my passion, right, of building things. And this particularly ignited my passion, much as you described, going to Cape Kennedy and seeing these things. And you're right. It's like watching, the Starship Enterprise being built, and it's a phenomenally intoxicating sort of thing that drags you along. But to be inside of it was quite different than what it looked like from outside of it. Particularly in the early days when it was nation state dominated. It was really a bureaucratic mess. You found out as a young engineer, you didn't actually get to build and design things. You got to do a lot of paperwork, and you got to sit in a lot of meetings, and you got to listen to a lot of whining and complaining and just normal sort of human things, right? And there was very little building involved in, the nation state stuff because the risks were taken differently. And that's eventually what drove a lot of us over into commercial. I did a lot of classified military stuff for a while because it had the sort of same flavor as commercial, where we were willing to take risks because we had a mission, and that was intoxicating until Snowden created problems, and most of us that were free spirits bailed out of that, and because of the repression of the system. But commercial has become the place where we can actually get things done, and that passion's back. That passion you described, that as a little kid, sort of seeing the wonderment of these things, and that's what gets me up every morning, is this idea of being able to build something that matters.
Mhm.
And we build hardware, and we take our own risks. We go out and raise money. We sell the people with the money on the ideas that we have, and we can do things that we've always said all these years, ought to be done by the government, but the government would never do it, and prove it out. So it's immensely satisfying from that point of view.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure. And you spoke a lot about mission and purpose as well. And when you are in the space sector, or something as innovative as the space sector, for example, where you are looking beyond what is available on Earth, you're looking beyond what people see as just standard practice. You just have to be such a big dreamer to work in such an innovative field as space. And I'm sure that has changed your perspective on a lot of things, because when you're looking so outwardly, ultimately you're also going to have an introspective look as well, not just as a person, but also just in terms of the community and humanity. I'd love to know how your experience within the aerospace sector has changed your views on the world and humanity as a whole.
Yeah, it's a really great question. Just to put it in perspective, I grew up in a little small town in California on a chicken ranch. And
Wow.
so my world was very, very small.
Yeah.
And, we rarely would make it to Los Angeles. And that was the big city for us, a big city, albeit, but, that was the entire world. So as I got into aerospace, it truly is a global enterprise. And the sort of international involvement at that level was really changed my view of things. And it's funny because as an American, when I was young, I was very critical of a lot of things here in this country, and not knowing anything different. And then when I started to live abroad, I began to understand, this is a pretty good place. And I couldn't wait to get back and buy steaks at midnight, or drive big cars on big wide roads and things of that nature. But the sense that the world is a very complicated and different place was very valuable to me. And I started to learn languages, which, believe it or not, in college really wasn't allowed to do, because the engineering curriculum didn't count languages towards your graduation. But I learned French, and then I learned Russian, and then later I learned Italian and some Spanish. And so it's been very valuable, just from a personal growth perspective as well. And apart from that, it's an opportunity really to feel a passion. And that's the thing. Most young people, I tell them, when they ask me, hey, why are you successful? And I just say, look, I'm lucky enough to have a passion, and be passionate about what I'm doing, because it's no longer work. And most of the people I hang around with, we kind of know this, and we all share it. And when you're passionate about it, you don't worry about the money. You just have to be good at it, and you have to do something that people want to buy, and the money happens.
I love that, and that's sage advice, especially for the young community. We have a lot of young people within the Philcoin community, and I'm sure a lot of them are probably at a stage in their lives where they're wondering, what's that next step? What is my actual passion? And a lot of people don't find it at their age. When you're 16, 17, you're applying for colleges. A lot of the time, you think you know what your passion is, but you only really find it along the way when you're a little bit older. And the beautiful thing about passion as well is not just about what gets you up in the morning, but it's also being able to plan ahead and to plan into the future for yourself and for your future generations. So I know you're working on some very exciting projects, and a rumor has it that you might even be adding author to your list of titles. Do you want to tap into that and share a little bit about some of the great projects that you're working on?
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed writing, and I have two books right now. One's almost to the publishers, called "Breaking All the Rules." It's the inside story of the new space race, as I call it. And this really evolved out of what I call my bullshit stories. I'm a storyteller, and people like to listen to them. And it occurred to me, as Elon became less of a pariah in society, believe it or not, back in the early days of SpaceX, he was considered a charlatan and a liar and a pariah,
Wow.
really, by the aerospace industry, which considered themselves above somebody like him. And
Mhm.
now you can see exactly where he's at. And about 10 years ago, I decided, the story I have with him and how it's connected with all these other people needs to be told, because I see myself as the Forrest Gump of space. I've been in the right place at the right time and seen these things happen. In some cases, been a part of it. And so that's what this is all about. It starts with, really, the story of passion and what drives a person like me, and follows that all the way through. My early days in France and the Soviet Union, and then Russia, and getting arrested by the Russians for espionage, and
Oh
my
my
country
goodness.
not supporting me. And yeah, it's got a lot of interesting tales. When you pull it all together, I think it makes an interesting read.
Oh, I'm
And
sure.
yeah, so writing books is kind of my new passion, if you will.
And I think you've touched on a lot of the qualities that really do underpin you as an entrepreneur. It's that hunger to learn new things, but also that, like, wanting to explore, wanting to try new things, being a risk taker, probably not really being afraid of much, because you're so willing to take all these different risks. And also being able to see beyond and plan ahead. And I know that you are obviously well connected and in a network with many people across the innovative space, whether it's aerospace and whether it's tech. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are within the space. For example, technology. Where do you think it's headed? What do you think the future holds for people who are within this innovative sector?
Yeah, technology is, in terms of all of human civilization, has been one of the things that defines the civilization. I become recently fascinated with what I call prehistoric human history, which goes back, 10, 12, 13,000 years ago, to the ice ages and the Younger Dreyfus period. And there's a lot of question about what the technology was at those times that allowed them to make these gigantic stone structures with tremendous precision. And then you go all the way through the Roman times, and if you spend any time in Europe going back to this perspective, you see that the technology of the Romans was pretty advanced. You go to these old Roman cities that are, thousands of years old, and they had running water, running sewers, and was really quite a civilization compared to where we are today, based on their technology. So it's important. Technology is a part of us. And, where we're at with our electronic means, in thousands of years, maybe this, goes away and nobody will ever be able to read it. But then again, maybe it goes somewhere. Maybe we do become multiplanetary species, like Elon says. It's really in our hands. And it's this momentum that's going forward. And it seemed like a crazy idea when Elon started telling me about humanity becoming multiplanetary. But when you see the catastrophes that befall civilizations, and the technology gets lost through various means, you begin to understand how important it is to us. So those of us that are in tech, I won't say we're anything unusual with humans, but we're sort of at the bleeding edge of it, and we're the ones who have that exploratory spirit, and we're the ones who have the desire to exploit it, and all that comes from it. Maybe it's a challenge, maybe it's more humanitarian. It's mostly the challenge. But I see technology really helping us exploit what I call the frontier economy of space. And I think that's the next multi-trillion-dollar economy, and much bigger than any other economy we have. So to me, where we stand today with space is much like where Spain stood 500 years ago, looking at the new world and sending galleons over to bring back gold. We're just scratching the surface.
I'm sure, I'm sure. And you actually just made me wonder, future generations, maybe a few 100,000 years from now, if they'll be looking back at us and our technology today and also thinking, wow, that's pretty impressive for their time, or whether they'd be mocking us and thinking, actually, we're a little bit behind schedule.
Who
Um,
knows? Who knows? Right?
who knows? But I love what you said about, technology really being in our hands. And it's all about how we are able to mold that technology and especially mold young minds as well into how they are able to use technology. Because the more that we advance with our tech and with our products and features, the more it's able to be used for good and for bad. So it's all down to the right choices. Now, of course, one of the most sort of talked about topics within the tech space is crypto and blockchain, and I know that you are an advocate for it. And I've
Mhm.
heard that you are one that you've been quite vocal on the topic. So I'd love to know about your journey within crypto, where you got started, and what really got you believing and holding faith within the sector.
Yeah, so I like to tell people I've tripped over many billion-dollar fortunes in my life, and crypto is probably one of them I tripped over. Internet certainly was. I remember when the internet came out, I said, I was a very early adopter in the mid 90s of the internet. It used to be called NASA Net, and there were websites popping up, and it was either porn or personal promotion. And people were saying, hey, we're going to make all this money on the internet, and I just couldn't see it.
Yeah.
So I walked past that, continued my space career. Crypto, my son, about 10 years ago, started telling me about it. And I was curious, of course, but was not really sold on the idea until I began to understand what it could do. And I bought Bitcoin at $100 and then bought some of my son's coin Nexus and at about 2 cents. And so I made quite a bit of money off of it because I
Mhm.
was one of the few people that got out when it was high. That's just sort of my investment strategy is I get out when it reaches a certain point. So I viewed it as an investment instrument rather. And what I've come to see it as, however, is a much more universal way to protect information. So, Bitcoin really and the blockchain was a pretty ingenious way to encrypt high value something, whether it's value transfer, whether it's information and so forth. And the power of bad, you mentioned, the forces of evil, if you will, which I consider to be government, by the way, the tyrannical governments. They want to force us into their currencies, and this is where I get pretty vocal. Our governments they want to continue to borrow money and put it on the backs of the citizens, and that's just not right. And this gives us the people control over our financial destiny and over our wealth. And if we believe as a society in the concept of wealth, then blockchain is one way to protect that, whether it be intellectual property, whether it be electronic property such as songs, and or whether it be value equivalent currency. So I think blockchain's a big deal. It's probably much bigger than Bitcoin is in society today. It's just slowly being exploited, and over time, I think we'll see it be a pretty universal technology in use. It's just right now the governments fight it. They try to regulate it. They try to control it. And the beauty of it is it frees us from all of that. So that whole conflict has to get solved, I think, before it really starts to run free, which I don't see it's done yet. And we get these guys like SBF, who I call them the crypto crook.
Yeah.
We'll see those kind of people come and go. But the technology innovation is what interests me, and I look forward to decades more of that kind of innovation. So I'm very supportive, and I think it goes hand in hand with the new frontier, the new economic frontier, which really has no borders of national borders. I'm not a one world guy, but the idea of not having to deal with governments in space is very appealing.
Absolutely, and I'm sure when it comes to the history and your career, in terms of blockchain being able to just neutralize systems and make transfer of information, like you said, easier, transfer of wealth easier, communications means easier across borders, across countries, across oceans. That's the beauty of blockchain, is just that ability to be able to put everybody on the same footing, whether that's in terms of wealth or whether that's in terms of, sharing of information. Now, I'd love to know, do you think that there's opportunity for blockchain and aerospace to leverage off of each other in terms of technology?
Absolutely. Aerospace ultimately is an information system. If you want to look at it from that perspective, you have, for example, imaging systems in space really just take photons and turn it into decision quality information. And so everything in between is the equivalent of the computer and the modems and all the piece parts that bring those data into your decision sphere. So in that sense, blockchain is a big part of protecting and conveying that data, that value, and they're forever linked because of I see it as sort of an independence or decentralization of any of these systems. Blockchain enables that, and that's precisely the force that space systems proliferate very well with. You look at Starlink, which is maybe not an obvious comparison, but during the Ukrainian war, I think they have something like 2,000 satellites up, and they were allowing the Ukrainians to communicate with each other independent of what was going on the ground. It's sort of, if you want to think of the Russians destroying the ground communications capability and targeting cell phones as being sort of, the equivalent of the government constricting currency flow and value flow, and then Starlink being the equivalent of blockchain to be allowed for that value to flow around. That was a great sort of analogy. And then the Russians couldn't shoot any of the satellites out of the sky. They could shoot one or two, but they'd have no net, effect on this. So that's the sort of decentralization that aerospace allows, which is very, very synergistic with blockchain, I think.
And how far into those synergies do you think they are? Do you think that there has been great adoption, or you think it's still quite a slow burn?
Yeah, I don't think it's even really been touched. There's a few places that are talking about it. There's some patents that are out there, but it's really just scratching the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the aerospace and commercial space is just at the very beginnings of its ability to exploit that domain. So I think of, say, space transportation to be the equivalent of what cars were in the 1910 to 1920 era, and we're just beginning to get that going. So as that grows, blockchain will grow into it. There's no doubt in my mind it will. Blockchain right now is fueled by, for lack of a better term, greed or financial interest, which is fine. That's capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
But as technologies expand and the synergy becomes obvious, then that will clearly spread to it.
I love that. And I think you made such a great point as well. Aerospace is still very much in its infancy in terms of, scratching the surface. And it's the same with blockchain. We are very much still very surface level. And I think the two highly innovative sectors that they are indirectly also competing when it comes to innovation. So I guess right now they don't really consider it a full partnership just yet. They have too much to explore on their own, I imagine. So when
Yeah.
it comes to innovation and staying ahead of competition, I mean, I imagine it must be quite a cutthroat industry. I imagine there must be a lot of rife competition where you work. How do you stay ahead of the curve?
Well, I guess I would challenge what you just said, that it's a lot of stiff competition. There's competition, but I would say it's full a lot more of pansies and verbal sparring than there is real competition. It's not at all like the automotive industry where there is really, really tough competition. That's been around for 100 and some odd years, and the sharks have learned how to swim very well there. Aerospace is still in its infancy, and we have a different type of people that inhabit this space. And what's really sort of interesting to me is you have this class of people that I call the internet trolls that sit in their mother's basement on wet stacks of paper and diapers. I'm using an analogy, obviously, but
Yes.
they do nothing, but yet they're the experts on everything, and they will criticize you. And then there are those of us who get out there and do it, and things go bad, things blow up, and we're always subject to the criticism of the others. That's probably the more vicious part of the aerospace industry. And one of the reasons why when I do things, I'm just quiet because I just can't stand the trolls. And I won't go to conferences either because they're full of trolls. They're full of people that don't do anything. So that's really the big divide, in my opinion, is those who are doers and those who are not doers. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of people who are not doers that are good at going out and gathering attention and money and things like that. And they give the rest of us a bad name. And it's a shame. But you really there's plenty of expansion opportunity here that the competition really isn't all that strong. The competition is to find competent people that know what they're doing here, and it's like blockchain's in its early infancy.
Mhm. And I'm sure that being somebody of your stature, it must be hard. It must be hard to be trolled. I personally call them the dusty armchair warriors because I always imagine them sitting in a dusty, dark basement in a really broken chair, and just sitting there with a few broken cans of soft drinks and probably some cigarette butts in an ashtray. And all they're doing
Right.
is just finding any excuse to bash anybody online and just cause conflict. And I'm
Very
sure, when it comes to being a leader and being a CEO, you do try to remove yourself from any conflict or any potential controversial situations, because it's not just yourself that you're looking after, but there's an organization, there's employees, and then there's everybody else who looks up to you that you might not even have met before, but they know about you, they know about your story and what you've achieved in life. So
Yeah.
I'd love to know, as a CEO, as a founder, what advice would you give to young people out there when it comes to their passions and following their dreams?
Yeah, so you're lucky if you find your passion, and you always have to. If you don't, you have to be on the watch for it. I have one son that he's lacking the passion. We keep trying to find things for him. And that's to me that's the key that unlocks it. And then I have a daughter who is a EMT and down in New Orleans, and that's her passion. She loves to be Johnny on the spot during a crisis. The rest of us really wouldn't want anything to do with it. So that's the number one thing you have to do is make sure that what you're doing you're passionate about. So if you're doing it for money, you're going to fail. You're going to get tired of it. And here I am, 57 years old, and it seems like just yesterday I graduated from college, and life goes by very fast. And if you have to spend that life of yours doing things you don't like to do, it goes by really slow. So I recommend the fast route, even though you might say, well, your life goes by. But the other thing is be quiet about your successes, and don't necessarily make an ass out of yourself by being boastful. I think the world of entrepreneurs rewards people better if they are not terribly boastful, and that's always a balance. That's something I'm very uncomfortable personally with, is the attention that I get. But on the other hand, I try to balance that with, am I inspiring somebody? Am I helping others to be inspired to do things that are good and great and good for society? Or am I being, self-serving? So it's always a fine line you have to watch.
Absolutely.
And as you get more and more successful, you'll have more and more people that will, want to steal everything from you.
Mhm.
And that's been the shocking part for me, to be honest. And it's been more of a, not so much as an entrepreneur, but just growing up as a human being. I mean, there's part of me that's still a very young boy, that's optimistic and thinks that people is inherently good, and a lot of times that's not true. There's people that will get near you that seem like they're your friend, and then when things are the opportune for them or they go bad, they bite, and they bite hard.
Mhm. I love that because, a lot of young people, it's all about having a really big circle and having more friends and being popular. And the older you get, you realize actually it's better to just keep your circle small and tight and be
Yes.
more selective on who you trust, because you are going to get disappointed along the way.
Disappointed is a mild way to describe it.
Exactly. I'm being
Sometimes you can
kind.
get very, yeah, yeah. No, I've been sued a lot. I've been called a lot of things. I've been accused of a lot of things, and you have to develop, your own faith in yourself that you're doing right. And you're right. You need that small circle of very loyal people that believe in you, that you can trust. And my dad used to say that, you're lucky if you have this many friends in your life that you can trust,
Yeah.
and probably true.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, I've looked back on my life as well, going from having different circles of friends invited to different kind of parties every weekend to now having exactly that, maybe a handful of friends that I can truly trust and that I can rely on. And when stuff hits the fan, I can call them up and I know they'll be there in a second to help pick me up.
Yep.
I know you touched on your kids, and I was just thinking your kids must have a seriously cool story to tell about their dad. How old are they? Are they still in school? Are they in college? Yeah, what are they pursuing in terms of their passions?
So I have six of them, and they
Oh my
are
goodness.
all different, right? So every single one of them is different, and have some that are free spirits that sort of wander the earth looking for the next fun thing to do. My one son's very involved in cryptocurrency. One daughter's, an EMT in New Orleans, and then another daughter that decides she want to go live in Australia and lives on the
Wow,
beach and is a waitress, right? But
that's awesome.
again, I'm all about, what's your passion?
Yeah,
Do what you want to do in life. And then my youngest daughter, who's 21, is an auto mechanic. She dropped out of engineering school
that's awesome.
because she likes cars. So, it couldn't be different, right? They're all over the place.
Well, I'm sure your Christmas lunches and your Sunday dinners must be interesting around the dinner table with all the stories to share with your family because you're all in different spaces, you're all doing different things, and I'm sure the conversations never get tiring
Well, we don't get together very much because they're scattered
because
all
you're
over the
all over.
world. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm sure when you do, it must be really great to catch up and have all these different stories from around the world.
Yeah, we fight a lot.
As do most families, as do most families. Now, I know your time is precious, Jim, but I just had two more questions. Firstly, there are a lot of books behind you, and I wanted to know what is your favorite book? What is the one book that you would go back to time and time again?
So, yeah, it's Richard Bach Illusions. Okay, so Richard Bach wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which was, believe it or not, the first book I read, of a sort of a serious variety. My mother gave it to me when I was, I think, 10 years old. But Illusions is a very special book that he wrote, where he talks about this Messiah, this reluctant Messiah named Don, who started off as an auto mechanic, and he could repair anything. And in fact, people found out he could repair their lives, and they got so interested in having him fix their lives that he couldn't fix his cars anymore. So he said, "Screw it, I'm done." And he said, I quit. I'm no longer your Messiah." And people said, "You can't do this. You're the Messiah." And he says, "No, I quit." And so he got in an airplane and he just starts barnstorming. This is in the 20s, across the U.S., and he runs into this other guy, and there's a whole lot of life lessons in this about how people are, how you trust people, you don't trust people, and it's really a magical story, and it's all about recognizing what your purpose in life really is. And all of us have different purposes in life, and I don't care if you're religious or not. Some say it's God-given, some say it's a karma. There's a lot of explanation for it, but I think we all know that we all have a purpose in life, and it's for us to discover. That's what it's about, and I probably have read that book a dozen times.
That's beautiful. And it sounds like the type of story that you can interpret no matter where you are in life, or, what you do in life and what religion you are. You can interpret it your own way because of the life lessons that you would learn. It reminds me a lot
Right.
of my favorite book, which is The Alchemist, which is the same for me in terms of you can interpret it differently every time you pick it up. At
Yep.
one stage it could be a life journey, but at another stage in your life it could be a romantic novel because it's just so beautifully written and so perfectly put together that it can resonate with anybody regardless of what they're going through.
True. Good point. Very good point. It's almost as if you pick these books up and they open up to the page that you need to see.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? That's absolutely
Yeah,
stunning. I'm going to have to add that to my reading list. So thank you for the recommendation. So just
quite happy.
before we end off, we've spoken about your network and all the amazing people you must have met along the way. So who were some of the most inspiring people you met and who have taught you some of the best life lessons? And they can be anybody, rich and famous, or even somebody from your
Sure.
family.
Well, so I'm probably going to surprise you. I mean, I've met a lot of very famous people. You know, President Trump comes to mind first. Met him in the White House a couple of times, and he's funny, that sort of thing, but not inspirational. I met Ronald Reagan back when he was president, and knew Senator Jake Garn from Utah, who was, actually one of the more inspirational politicians I've ever met, and on and on. So I'm, Patrick Dempsey, I raced with him. I raced with the CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, know him personally. Nice people, right? And Jim's very passionate about cars, by the way. He's a true racer, right? He and I, we're cut from the same cloth. But honestly, the most inspirational person for me was Frank Red, who
Mhm.
was my major professor. And Frank, he he was a, I'm sorry, I get a little emotional about it, but he
Oh,
was
thank you,
he was a
Jim.
great influence. Retired colonel, he came to the university. He's the one that took me under his wing and said, "Hey, you can do this." And he inspired me immensely. Yeah, I miss him.
Oh, Jim, I wish I could just give you a hug right now. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And it just reminds us all about those incredible stories of when we were in school, in college. There was always that specific teacher or lecturer or tutor who really, really touched our lives and who really showed us the potential in ourselves that we
Right,
ourselves did not see. And I think that is
right.
the most powerful things that any teacher or lecturer or tutor can do, is to bring out the best in people and to show them things that they don't see in themselves, which is so powerful. I too have a story like that. I had a music teacher who we used to fight like cat and dog. And I used to come home crying and stomping my feet and almost all the time telling my mom, I'm going to be quitting music. And she used to say to me, she's like, you know why you fight? You guys are the same person.
Yeah,
And
right.
that's why you just don't get along. You are cut from the same cloth and you just keep, not getting along. But at the end of the day, all she wants is the best from you. And, about 20 years later, we're still in contact. She'll still message me from time to time, just sending me her love. And every time she does, it's a special moment for me. It just brings back those memories. So I'm very touched by your story because I too can
Yeah,
resonate with that and how
yeah,
powerful that footprint can be on your life and also on your journey. So Jim,
yeah.
I
If you're a teacher, remember this, right? That what you do for your students can touch them in ways you never know.
mhm. Absolutely. And they're so undervalued, and I know that's not an isolated case in just the US, but it's everywhere. Even me as a South African, teachers are not given the honor and the appreciation that they deserve. It's a tiring job, and you
Thankless
have to,
task.
it's endless, and each child is a different personality with different dreams that you have to mold and bring the best out of them. And then you've got some kids who are just purely difficult and difficult to manage. But it is a very, very beautiful profession that I do believe pays off in terms of how you're able to just guide people along their life's journey.
Yes, agreed. Agreed.
Well, Jim, it has been an incredible, incredible time with you. And I know that your time is precious. So I'm so grateful to have had you today and to have
Pleasure.
heard about your personal journey and also the insights that you have into passions, innovations, future sectors, aerospace. And what I want the community to specifically take away from this episode is the fact that no matter where you are, what you're doing, and where you find yourself in, you can always discover more about yourself. You can always follow something new and something different. Just because you're doing one thing with your life doesn't mean that you can't do something completely different and follow a totally different pathway and explore that. I mean, you yourself race cars, spacecrafts. You're also doing a bit of crypto. It's really vast. You're writing a book as well. And I think at the end of the day, when we're all sitting in our rocking chairs and looking out of the windows in our old age homes, we do want to make sure that we've lived a really full life and we've discovered as much about ourselves as we possibly could. So thank you so much for uncovering that with us, and for sharing your personal story and all these lessons with our community today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Jim.